Hello, my name is Shane Bush. I'm the fisheries management biologist for Lake Taneycomo and Table Rock down here. My office is at the hatchery. Clint Hale in the back of the room. He's going to talk a little bit as well. He's our hatchery manager here at Shepherd. So I'm going to go over just the status of what the fish population looks like in Taneycomo now based on our most recent sampling. Talk about the regulations Phil was talking about and how those have worked. We'll talk a little bit about last year's high water event and how that all came down to what happened here in the hatchery as well as in the lake. Kind of help hopefully give you all a better understanding of why it happened and how it happened. And then Clint's going to give you kind of an update of what happened here at the hatchery during that event. And then we'll stick around as long as you want to answer questions, kind of talk about the future forecast for next year. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the background. I know a lot of you all know this lake probably much better than me. I got down here in 2008. I've been the biologist here since. But Taneycomo was first stocked in 1958, right after it was flooded. Table Rock was built. At one point, they were stocking 1.6 million. That wasn't allowing for any room for growth. The fish were getting over harvested. You'll kind of see through these slides. And around 1992, they came down to around that 700,000 mark, and that's where we've stayed. Based on some studies we've done, that seems to be about optimal for optimal growth and survival of fish in our trophy area. Brown trout first stocked in 1980. Big push of them, 50 to 70,000 to start out, and now we're back down to about 10,000. The past 3 to 4 years, we've stocked 15,000, trying to replenish fish that we lost in 2011. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So now we stock 700,000 rainbows a year and 10,000 brown trout a year. 450,000 of those, maybe, right, Clint, come from Shepherd of the Hills?
475, yeah. Sorry.
Those all come from Shepherd of the Hills. The others come from Neosho National Fish Hatchery as part of the mitigation for turning Lake Taneycomo into cold water fishery. You can see based on this graph from January to December, we stock higher in the summer months when we have higher angling pressure. And based on our creel surveys we've done, this coincides very well with the amount of angling pressure out there as well as the amount of fish that people catch throughout the year. So we want to have more fish in the system when there's more people wanting to fish for them. Our trout sampling takes place every summer, typically in August. We just completed our last sample on the 18th of August this year. The upper 3.5 miles of the lake is where we do all of our sampling. You may wonder how we can make presumptions of the rest of the lake based on only sampling trout here, but again, based on the creel survey that we conducted back in 2008-2009, I compared the data of the fish anglers caught above the special regulation area and below it. Those matched up almost exactly with the size structure of the fish that we're seeing in our samples. I mean, as soon as we get below Fall Creek, it's a put and take fishery, and you'll see the graphs that I'm going to put up here in a minute. So gives us a really good representation of what's going on, a snapshot, if you will, and we catch a lot of trout in just one night sampling. The regulations went into effect in 1997, the special regulations of 12 to 20 inch slot on rainbows. There's a lot of numbers on this graph, and I don't have a pointer, but 1996, the total number of fish we were catching per hour of electrofishing of rainbow trout was only 23 per hour. In 2016, we're catching 243 per hour in that same stretch. So we've increased tenfold. In the regulation area, it's bumped up, and also in the non-regulation area below it. The number of fish and the size of fish have all improved as a result of this slot limit that we put in. So this year, numbers looked really great. I was really pleased to see 25% of the rainbows that we sampled in the regulation zone were over 16 inches. That's phenomenal. So really happy with the way the fish look, the size of the fish, and the condition. You'll also see the numbers jumped up of fish size below the regulation area as well. There's a lot of information on this graph, but point your attention, these are link frequency graphs. This is when we take our electrofishing data, put it on graph form so we can see the size structure. So 0 to 24 inches on the rainbows. The blue lines indicate the slot limit. So this is a special regulation area. You see where most of our fish lie, in that 12 to 18 inch mark. Some squeaking up to 20. Below the management zone, you can see once a fish gets to about 12 inches, it's not staying down there very long. Many of you may be, or probably know many catch and keep trout fishermen, and that's what that's designed for. That's why we stock so many. That's why we have the regulation zone, to protect a portion of those to grow to larger sizes, and it really is working. Again, 63% of the fish in the regulation zone over 13 inches, and 25% over 16 inches. So, and this bottom graph shows you from 1996 to present. This purple line is the catch rates of all sizes of fish. So you can kind of see a trend and almost a plateau, since about 2010 of where we are now. So we feel like the stocking we're doing now is working. The catch rates of bigger fish have kind of rose and plateaued as well. Brown trout. In 2011, I mentioned a little bit before, we had some pretty poor water quality. That equated to poor water quality in Taneycomo, as well as poor water quality coming to the hatchery. Brown trout don't do really well in warm water. Warm water holds a lot more parasites, so reproduction of brown trout in that facility here was very low. So the fish that we stocked, we didn't get really good survival on. And so you see this gap, from 12 to 18 inches in 2011. We're missing those fish that we should have, go growing through the system. So that's why we stocked. We went from 10,000 to 15,000 starting in 2011, 12. You can see now we've got fish of all sizes, all the way up to above 20 inches, which is the minimum length limit. The fish, I'm sure you'd agree, if you've been out fishing this year, the brown trout look really great. They're fat and happy. So the brown trout have rebounded. 89% of the brown trout we caught in our sample this year were over 13 inches. 36% of them were over 16 inches. That's some pretty good fish to go out and catch and release. So harvest, based on our creel surveys, very minimal. The reason you don't see brown trout above 20 inches isn't because people are keeping them. It's just that, they're probably getting harder to find, harder to catch. They're harder for us to catch. We try not to. If we did our electrofishing in November, I think I'd see more, but the dissolved oxygen is so low, we don't want to take the risk of stressing those fish out. So that's why we do it in August. We probably see bigger fish later throughout the fall, but we got to hit it before that DO really starts to drop. So, but anyway, the brown trout are looking really good. 5% of the fish we caught were over 20 inches, so there are some trophies out there. The Triploid brown trout program, this is a project that we're working on several different waters around the state: Taneycomo, North Fork of the White, and Current, or 11 Point?
Current River.
So what they basically did, and Clint can tell you more about this than me if you're interested, these fish are bred without reproductive organs, essentially. The thought is to put that energy that they would put to reproduction into growth, which we feel like they are doing, and I'll show you why here in a minute. So there's about 14,000, give or take, in the lake right now. We're done with this program. This was just a 4-year project. We didn't have any to stock in 2016 because of everything that happened last winter. But you can see length frequency graphs from 2014, 15, and 16, and you can kind of see those fish growing, getting bigger. Now we've got fish over 20 inches that are triploid. And relative weight, that is essentially body condition when I talk about the fish being fat and happy. 100, of course, is the best. You can see that blue line. The red represents rainbow trout, and this is another graph over time from 1993 to the present. Typically, we're running between 89 and a little over 100 on the relative weights of rainbows. Pretty good. Brown trout continue to stay well above 100. Body condition is great. As you all probably know from seeing it, there's a ton of food out there for them, so they survive and do very well. I just threw this graph up here to give you an idea of just one of the details when we think about stocking and how many we stock. The red indicates the relative weight, and the blue indicates how many we stocked per year. And you can see this inverse relationship. The more we stock, the more the body condition goes down. So, you know, we know 10 to 15,000 is a good number to keep those fish very healthy. And that's what we stick to. And this is some sampling data from this year. So this is the length of some triploid brown trout that we captured, the weight, the relative weight. What I want to point out is the two biggest brown trout we caught this year were triploids, 6.8 pounder and a 9.3 pounder. If you see the relative weights, over 150 on both of those fish compared to diploids of comparable size. I don't know if you can see it down below all this stuff, but a 5.6 pound diploid fish is only about 118 on the relative weight and body condition. So that's why it seems like when these fish are getting to these mature sizes, they're not putting that energy into reproduction. It looks like they're putting it towards growth. It'd be really interesting to see how this shakes out. Like I said, we're done stocking them. We'll kind of watch these fish grow throughout the next 5-10 years and just see what comes of it. If you catch one, you can identify them because they're missing their adipose fin, that fin right above their tail on their back. We've clipped those, that's how we identify them. That's the only fin on a fish that won't grow back. So you might be thinking you've caught one and that's why it was missing it. And so a lot of you are aware too, back in 2011 we used some funding from the Table Rock Lake National Fish Habitat Initiative project to install some boulder clusters in the upper end of the lake. From what I understand, and just observationally, looks like these have created some scours behind them, which is what they were designed to do. So be aware those are out there and could provide some good fish holding structure when they're running a little bit of water. Okay, the fun stuff. It's 2015 is the blue line you can see from January to December. This is Table Rock Lake's graph, so 915 is normal pool. You can see what happened in about July. After several spikes before that, big inflow of fish in big inflow of water in July caused several problems. And then we won't even talk about what happened in December. If you can see on the far right corner of the graph, an anomaly that has never happened. What we started seeing starting about end of July in Table Rock was fish started floating. Started getting reports of dead fish, all species, all sizes. These fish started dying all the way up the White River, and it slowly, progressively worked its way down the lake, kind of working its way out of the Kings and the James. It's best to picture a layer, and I'm going to show you an animation that's going to help you understand a little bit more, but you know, as they generate more and more water, they generate more of that deeper oxygenated water out. So with that high water in 2015, they ran water all year. I mean, I don't even know if the generators ever stopped. From my observation, it didn't. I'm sure you thought the same. And you'll see why that affected this. What we had was fish getting trapped in these deeper layers of oxygenated water. I'll explain a little bit more, but last report I got was in September. Probably about 3,000 fish is what I counted. Not anything population-wise that we're going to observe a difference in Table Rock, but something worth noting anyway. A lot of the fish look like this bass. He's coughed up his swim bladder. Why would a fish do that? Well, he suffocated. He had no oxygen. A lot of these fish in the summertime will sit in that really deep layer of oxygenated water. And Table Rock, being such a deep lake, is really unique in that once the thermocline sets up, you still have a little bit of oxygen below that thermocline. So thermocline usually sets up 20, 30 foot. 2015 it set up about 20 or shallower. Below that, 20 foot down to about 100 foot, we had no oxygen, zero. From about 100 foot to 160 foot, there was a layer of 5 to 6 parts per million starting in July. So picture that wedge getting pulled through the dam at 140 foot into Taneycomo, and as that dissipates, those fish that are down there can't get to the surface because there's this 80-foot layer of anoxic water. And that's why we see these fish floating around. You combine that with water temperatures over 90 degrees last summer, you can see this green nasty stuff in the bottom right corner. Planktonic algae started to bloom. When that stuff dies, it uses oxygen. So fish in the upper water column were affected as well, not just the ones down deep. So everything kind of came together to create the perfect storm in the lake, and it didn't stop there. So this is a animation that's going to show you from January to December for 2 consecutive years. Keep in mind this is 1996 and 1997, but it gives you the idea a little bit better of what's happening. So dark blue is the best oxygen and red is no oxygen. Picture the dam on the right from 0 to 200 feet, and as you go up the lake it's going to get shallower, right? So kind of think of this wedge up here, the upper end of the White River. So you'll see through January everything's pretty good. March, April, no thermocline really setting up yet. Right there, so starting about June, we start to get that thermocline setting up in the upper portions of the lake. So what you can see, you've got good oxygen here, decent oxygen here, and no oxygen in the middle. That's why the fish started dying in the upper end of the lake sooner than the rest of it. Kind of watch what happens to this wedge of oxygenated water. You get this layer of anoxic water. This is September, October. And what you see on the right, down there at 140 foot, is that getting pulled through the dam. Then you're left with no oxygen from really 20 foot all the way down to the bottom. Lake turns over in December, things get better. And this equates to what happens in Taneycomo as well. Now we're going through another year, 1997. Try to pause there. Oh, darn it. Anyway, but you get the idea. So typically, you know, you wouldn't have oxygen down here to support much life, but some years you do. The more generation that they pull through the dam, the faster it's going to deplete. So last year, that's why we lost oxygen starting around September. It's a terrible DO year in Taneycomo too. And because there was no oxygen down at the bottom of the lake for so long, that's what caused all that water quality problems at that depth that was feeding our hatchery and feeding the lake last winter.
Shane, how'd you get your readings?
Beg your pardon?
How'd you get your readings?
These readings?
Yeah.
This was made by a guy with the USGS, and I don't know how he got these readings, to be honest with you. It was in the 90s, but he wrote up a really good report, hydrodynamics of Table Rock Lake. I can email it to you. I've got electronic. It's a good report, but it talks about this. But then he built this animation a few years ago that really helps understand how that works and why. I'm not sure where he took the readings, if they were going out. They had some, I think they had like a vertical system of DO probes mounted somewhere, which is what I'd like to get installed in the lake too. Then we could see, you know, when the lake's getting ready to turn over, we would be a little more prepared for it here in the hatchery and in the lake. So I've kind of been working, we've got a committee formed, the White River Dissolved Oxygen Committee, and we kind of deal with these issues in the lake, or at least try to find ways to cope with the issues in the lake.
Using that torpedo, huh?
Using
that torpedo?
Well, we haven't used it yet. What I was thinking about trying to get would be some sort of a real-time sensor that we could mount somewhere at the dam that would give us from 0 to 200 foot. Then you can see as that thermocline sinks in the winter when things are going to start getting better on Taneycomo.
How much do these sensors cost?
How much do
What it cost? Or what are they?
probably 50 to 60,000 is one of them that he was looking at.
Now, how many you need to do on the whole lake?
Well, I wouldn't need to do it in the whole lake necessarily. We could just mount it at the dam, and then we could get an idea of when the lake's about to turn over there. That's when they do the DO profiles every month. The USGS does that and gives it to the Corps. They do that down at the dam. So that could be quite a bit different. You see on this animation, you know, the upper end of the white starts turning over a lot quicker than down the lake, and you lose oxygen a lot quicker up there.
Is that Is that funded by the state, Missouri Department of Conservation, that
Well,
sensor?
no, that's not. That's USGS that does the DO profiles, but that's kind of up in the air. We haven't really talked about it. It's just
So
looking
how
at some
how
ideas.
How you fund it in order to get that, right?
We haven't talked about that in our group yet, but we would. Probably would be shared by the Corps, maybe Southwest Power, MDC. You know, those are all the entities that are involved in this DO committee. Yeah. And this is another graph from the Corps. It's kind of messy, but reverse what you were looking at now. Now this is the dam from 0 to 100 foot or 200 foot, and this is your DO from 0 to, you know, whatever. The blue line is June, so you can see, you know, good oxygen all the way throughout. Really start, the purple and the black are ones to focus on. You see thermocline set up. The purple was in August, about 20 foot, and you had no oxygen. But there's your little dip, your little piece that's getting pulled through the dam. So by end of October, you know, we had no oxygen here. This red line is just flatlined at 0, and that's, according to the Corps of Engineers at Little Rock, that's never happened. They've never seen 0 readings all the way from 20 foot down to the bottom. So it is quite an anomaly. So let's talk about why it happened. Everybody knows where Cape Fair is on James River Arm. That's what it looked like in July of 2015. All that stuff's got to decompose somehow. So the bacteria that are in the water are going to decompose that. When they do it, they're going to use up oxygen. You combine that use of oxygen with them pulling all that deep oxygen out through the dam, you're going to come up with some anoxic conditions pretty fast down at the bottom. So what happens when they run out of oxygen, these bacteria still have to break it down, so they start pulling oxygen from other sources. Nitrates, sulfates, and carbon dioxide are always occurring down there in the bottom of the lake. So these bacteria start pulling oxygen from them. Nitrates turn into nitrogen gas, which we had feeding our hatchery in November, December. Sulfates turn into hydrogen sulfide, give you that rotten egg smell, which we had down here. And then carbon dioxide then goes to methane. All very, very highly toxic to all fish, specifically trout. So with no oxygen down there at the bottom of the lake for 3-4 months out of the summer, all this gases are starting to build up, and that's what we had coming through the dam at 140 feet right before the lake turned over. And just another graph to show you, kind of demonstrate this. 3 to 4 parts per million fish are not going to be found in those areas. Get all the way down to 0. It talks about hydrogen sulfide building up. So just another, there's a lot of literature on it.
So right now the Lake Taneycomo is at 2 parts per million. So if you look at that chart right there, that's not very good.
No, it's at 2 parts per million when they're not generating water, yeah.
Yeah.
When they generate, of course, they get flushes of oxygenated water because the Corps can inject oxygen, or they can vent the turbines. So yeah, that's why the outlets are such good places to fish when water's off. We've got, what, 8 coming out of the hatchery
At
outlets?
least, yeah.
Parts per million, so really probably the hatchery is what saves Taneycomo during a lot of these DO years. I mean, we're pumping all that oxygenated water after the fish use it here in the hatchery into the lake. So Clint's going to take over from here and talk about the fish loss, you know, why it happened, kind of give you a little bit more details of exactly what happened, how much, and how we dealt with it. So,
All right.
fun stuff. We really like rehashing this.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit what happened this past November. Shane done a good job explaining about the anaerobic bacteria breaking down that organic material which created those gases which entered our facility. It started on a Sunday. We had been smelling, so let me go back a little bit. So every year when prior to lake turnover, we always smell like a rotten egg smell for a few days. We have low oxygen around 0 for around a month. But 2015 was different because our 0 was over 2, almost 3 months, around 0. So when you have that extended period, like Shane was saying, of that anoxic water, that's when that anaerobic bacteria took over and created those gases, and that's why we had something that's never happened in this facility since it was built in 58, 59. Flood years are always bad for the hatchery too, because we have that influx of organic material, and also when they're generating water, they're pulling the limnion levels of the lake down. So when they generate constantly for a month, Shane was saying, pulling that layer of water out, you're also bringing the warm layers down. And warmer water can't retain oxygen like cold water can for very long. So when you have a summer flood, which is unusual, your water's even warmer up here that they're pulling down. So that's why another reason why there was just no oxygen from, was it 20 to 100 foot, or 100 some foot. So anyway, started on a Sunday. We started getting reports from Point Royale asking if we were doing something wrong. They were smelling this rotten egg smell and thought we were doing something. I could smell it at my house here at the hatchery. I could smell it off 165. A little unusual, but like I said, we smell it every year, but not for very long. So I got a call on Sunday. It said all the fish in the visitor center are dead, and that in the tank, the aquarium back here, so all those big fish were dead. Well, that was concerning, and we had some oxygen issues, some fish kills due to some oxygen issues. So I didn't know what was going on in the tank, because we can't inject oxygen in there, so I didn't really know his water quality yet. So I come and we had some issues with 2 or 3 different tanks were dying. I cranked up the oxygen. By the next day, most all the rainbows in the upper facility were dying. I was 100% certain that his water quality then, to combat those gases, we can use liquid oxygen, so all of them were turned to their highest setting. And if you ever seen the head boxes on those tanks out there, that breaks up the water as well. Made a call to different warm water hatcheries to bring aerators to even further break up the water. Our best water was at the brown trout facility, which is usually our worst water because it's reused. But by the time it went through all these tanks and went through the drum filters and got to the brown trout facility, to those low head oxygenators, it was broke up and dissipated enough, those fish weren't even affected down at the brown trout. So I had empty tanks down there. So we moved a lot of our fish from up here to those tanks. Well, I didn't have enough room for all of them, so I started calling other facilities, and we moved to other facilities as well. It almost wiped out the whole initial rearing in the back, or we call it the back room. It's where eggs, fry, and fingerling are. So I switched all those to well water, because well water doesn't have those issues coming from the ground. Switched all the little fish outside the well water, and we stopped the death there. It was an everyday thing. It lasted 3 days. When we done our water testing, I sent samples off to test for the gases. And one thing I did was methane. I'm pretty sure we had a methane issue too. But nitrogen, as you can see, toxicity for trout, 104% saturation. Our levels were 125%. That creates a lot of problems like gas bubble disease, pops their eyes out. Hydrogen sulfide, the main culprit, as you can see, 0.0087 parts per million is toxic. We had readings of 0.4, which is a tremendous load of hydrogen sulfide. And if you're ever out at the raceways, if you look on 2 different sets of raceways, you see that the bird cages are yellow. That's from that hydrogen sulfide. When we were using the aerators, it was shooting water into those bird cages. And then when we got done, we noticed the yellow tint, and that was from that hydrogen sulfide. Permanent stain. Permanent reminder of what happened, actually. We almost had a total loss. We were going to have a total loss on our brood stock. Well, that's our future. That's future Taneycomo. That's future of, we cater to the 4 trout parks. They rely on us for fish and fingerlings. So they were priority 1. They were the first fish that we moved, was our brood stock, to save them. And I talked a little bit that all could be traced back to the summer flood. So I had staff all over the state come here and help. I couldn't keep up with it. We had to pick up dead fish every day just so if your fish die and then they get against the screen, the water level rises, equalizes your pool, and you can kill them all. So from morning to dark, we had literally morning, first daylight to dark. We were picking up dead fish, moving fish, transferring fish to other hatcheries. I received a lot of help, and I couldn't have done it without them. We done some stocking too, I forgot to mention that. Besides, we have so many fish in these 100-foot raceways that you can't just put them in empty pools and take them to other facilities. You're still gonna run out of space. So we stocked some fish. We stocked 54,000 brown trout, no. We transferred 54,000 brown trout. Rainbow trout were transferred to Montauk and Bennett. 62,000 10-inch fish were stocked in Lake Taneycomo. So we just done some, like a November, December stocking. Was it November, December, and part of January? Stocking just to get those fish out in the stream and get them away from these conditions. And I talked about the well water with frying fingerlings. But despite all that, we met all of our stocking for the year, and we have rebounded. I don't know if I talked about that. That's the staining I'm talking about. See the yellow on the head box, on the concrete? That's from the hydrogen sulfide. That's a picture from Bennett Spring. We transferred those brown trout to Bennett Spring, and that's what died. That looks like a lot. It always looks like way more than what it is. That was out of 7,000. I think that was 400 or 500 or something like that. So we rebounded. We got eggs from federal sources. Let me talk about this first. I'm sorry. We decided to do a reduction statewide in 2016 as a result of what happened to us and Bennett Spring. Bennett Spring experienced a December flood, which the Niagara backed into their hatchery, and they had a lot of fish escape that way. Not a lot of death, but a lot of fish went out into the Niagara. We decided to go, instead of 225 fish per tag in the parks, we went down to 2. And Taneycomo was going to get 581,000 instead of 700,000. And I decided to spread that out throughout the year so it'd be less impactful, trying to get the biggest fish that we could each month so there would be less impact to the fishery and anglers. Is that, is this part of yours? Oh, sorry. So what I want to talk about, we've rebounded. We got eggs from federal sources. We worked with other hatcheries. We worked as a system. Montauk was able to provide some fish to us to fill some gaps. We utilized well water for way longer than we ever had before to speed up growth. The warmer the water, the quicker you can grow trout. So to fill that gap, that void, we lost a lot of our fish were 5 to 6 inches. We had to speed up the ones behind it to try to fill that gap. And so that's what we did. And, I'm happy to say that I had a managers meeting this past Tuesday, and we're going back to 225 next year in the trout parks, and we're going back to full stocking in Taneycomo. And that's, it's really remarkable how all the hatcheries pulled together, and we rebounded from this situation. It's never happened before. I hope it never happens again. So, is there anything else you wanted to talk about for questions? Okay, sorry. I'll give it back to Shane.
So, just some good news, bad news, and we'll open it up to questions if y'all want to stick around. I saw a slight reduction in catch rates below Fall Creek, probably due to stocking less fish. We said it's a put and take fishery, 55 fish an hour versus 91 fish an hour last year. The good news, comparable catch rates in the whole trophy area, really throughout the whole sampling zone. 243 fish an hour is what we caught this year compared to 265 fish per hour last year. So that, when we're talking about a population level impact, I really don't think any fish that died in Taneycomo had a level impact on the whole population, whatever would have happened last year.
EF means electrofishing.
Yeah, this is electrofishing, yeah, sorry. And we catch rates, catch per unit effort, that's fish per hour, that's how we measure our success. So when I say size structure, the percentage of fish over 16 inches has improved since last year. As you would expect, you have fewer fish, you have more food to go around. The fish are gonna get bigger, they're gonna grow more, they're gonna get fatter. So 24% of the fish we sampled were over 16 inches this year versus just 13% over 16 inches last year. And I'd like to hear from you all too, if you've been out fishing this year. From the folks I've talked to, fishing's been very good for sizes and numbers of fish. I put May, but that's before we knew we were going to resume normal commitment in 2016. Just to bring some of this together, reduced stocking may contribute to larger fish with minimal impacts to angler catch rates. Don't think that I'm gonna always stock 580,000. This would be something, if we ever went to a stocking reduction, we would run it by all the anglers, everybody, to see, just like with the slot limit Phil was talking about, how TU was involved. We'd love to work with this local chapter as much as possible on everything. You all are out there much more than I am. I want to hear your input of what's going on, you know, and I'll give you all my number and Clint's number. But if we were to reduce stocking, I think we could achieve a lot more growth on our rainbow trout in Taneycomo. I think we could get bigger fish, fatter fish, because it's just a basic law of fisheries management. The more fish you stock, the more mouths there are to feed, the less food availability there is. We are going to start a creel survey next January, and that'll run for 2 years. So we'll be talking to you guys a lot more out on the water. Some of the things I want to ask is get some angler input. Would anyone support that? Do you want to catch the same amount of fish or slightly fewer fish but have larger fish? Or is everybody fine with catching, you know, 10, 11-inch fish on average below Fall Creek? So things to think about. Nothing we're going to change without consulting everybody. But based on the results of our sampling surveys this year, it just brings to mind some questions that, hey, this lake might be capable of a lot more, you know, growing bigger and better fish if we want to try to go that route. So normal stocking for next year. More good news, these are last year's fish. Got to brag on those a little bit. Always end the slideshow with good pictures. So here's our contact information. We're not hard to find. We're both officed here at the hatchery, but jot it down, email us, call us. Any questions or concerns you have. You know, we want the same things you all do. We want minimal impacts during our low DO season. We want the best, biggest fish out there, the most fish for you all to catch. So let's work together. You know, let's see what we can do to work together to accomplish these things.